most cues are trying to get you towards neutral, but saying have a neutral spine is not a great cue. Telling someone to get into neutral spine doesn't tell them how to do it. So cues tell us how to do something, but they're not necessarily the final shape. This is kind of how these cues come about. Students do them, they find neutral, but then they keep doing the cue and they go too far, and then they have to do the opposite cue, so they start to get confused. We're just trying to get everybody to go straight down the middle of the road. You may be veering left or right. Hi, my name is Sarah Westbrook. I'm a yoga therapist, and you are listening to the Yoga Posers podcast, where we talk about one yoga pose at a time. In fact, what we usually do is divide an hour-long discussion into 2 episodes. So you get 2 episodes per pose. That first episode is going to talk about fundamentals, basics, what the pose should look like, do's and don'ts. But the second episode will dive a lot more deeply into the mechanics, why sometimes we need different cueing for different body types, variations on the pose, and therapeutic applications, how we can use this pose to address working with a specific condition or injury, something that they're trying to work around. So when we think about pointer dog, it's one of our most fundamental poses. I don't even think it's a yoga pose. I think it came over from Pilates. And thank you, Pilates. You've given a lot to yoga, and I hope you're getting a lot back from us. So this core pose works on helping us to find core stability with hip and shoulder mobility. So we want freedom for the limbs to move in a stable but open way, while the core can maintain its neutrality. And this is where we get into the trickiness of pointer dog, because it's actually kind of easy. You're just on all fours. So you're kneeling, and then your hands are on the floor, and then you stretch one arm forward alongside your ear, and you reach your opposite leg out back. That's the pose. And then you just switch between alternating those diagonal pairs of limbs. The hard part is knowing if you have a neutral spine. So my hope for you for these episodes is that you are able to learn the importance of neutral spine. Why? I'm going to sell you on why finding neutral spine is so important. Number 2, I want you to have external cues, external ways of knowing if you've actually achieved neutral spine, because all fine and good, I'd like to have a neutral spine. What the heck does that even mean? And how would I ever know if I'm there without a mirror or a yoga teacher to tell me? Thirdly, I'd like you to figure out once and for all, if you've been listening to many episodes, if you tend to arch your low back every time you try to move your limbs, and some of you round your low back when you try to move your limbs instead of keeping a neutral spine. Even trickier than that, some of you might round your low back and tilt your pelvis forward, or more commonly, tuck your pelvis while you're still arching your low back. So in some ways, the core is still finding ways to escape a true efficient neutrality. Now, why would the body do that, you might say? How come when I go to a yoga class, my body just doesn't automatically do pointer dog the correct way? Well, that's because the body always takes the path of least resistance. Your body will do its best to preserve muscle length and repeat neurological patterns that reinforce the way that you most commonly use your body. So if you usually sit all day long and the muscles have adapted to that posture, your body will be very reluctant to change those muscular lengths or to change the posture and how you sit. It says, you do this most of the time. Why would I change? That wouldn't be efficient. Similarly, you might walk in a certain way or move in a certain way typically, or maybe you have a sport where there's a lot of repetitive movements, say like tennis. So your body has adapted to how you swing that racket, and it becomes a very habituated thing. So if you try to use your arm to do anything else, it's going to pretend that you're still swinging that racket. You're going to see those patterns replicated. If you're a dancer and you're used to pointing your feet, you're going to start pointing your feet all the time, even when you don't need to. So as movement professionals, yoga teachers, and specifically yoga therapists, how can we start to change those patterns? How can we use a yoga practice, a yoga pose to train the actually biomechanically efficient, more correct way of moving and eliminate these old dusty habits that get in our way, that cause injuries, that limit what we'd like to be able to do with our bodies on and off the mat? So pointer dog, also called bird dog. So I have a mutt, and every once in a while she'll lift up her front paw and she points her nose sort of right at what she's looking at. Hunting dogs have a particular posture when they're pointing at something, which is pretty close to what this pose actually looks like. Sometimes it's called Parshva Balasana. Parshva meaning side and Balasana meaning child's pose. So I'm not a fan of that name, but whatever. Sometimes we try to wedge the Sanskrit in there. I think pointer dog is good enough. Only drawback to calling it pointer dog is that search engines aren't really good at distinguishing the difference between pointer dog and down dog. So you'll see a lot of crossover when you do some research into trying to get to pointer dog. Lots and lots of articles and images of downward facing dog. Completely different poses. Pointer dog is when you're on your hands and knees, also called all fours, also called being in quadruped, and you reach one arm alongside your ear and the opposite leg back. So the opposite pairs of limbs are moving and you alternate those pairs. The benefit of this is that it can challenge your balance. It challenges you to keep a neutral spine. It challenges your core to help keep you upright. But because it's fairly stable, it's pretty easy to cheat here. We also get an awareness that can be built in how the arm is brought alongside the ear. That's called shoulder flexion. Whenever we flex the shoulder, that's your arm reaching up alongside your ear. Again, your body probably isn't doing that correctly. Your scapula may or may not be moving. It moves too much. It moves too little. It doesn't move in the right direction. Your arm bone may be spun internally instead of externally. So that palm might be facing out with the thumb down instead of palm in, thumb up, which is external rotation. Your leg that's reaching out behind you, it's probably either too internally rotated or externally rotated. And the leg is probably not parallel to the floor. It's either too high, most commonly, and or it's not straight out back. It's crossing the midline. So it's crossing over to the other side of the body. And most egregiously, we'll see that instead of the foundation thigh being perpendicular to the floor, usually it's on an angle with the knee narrower than the hip joint itself. That's called hip adduction, ADD, like you're adding to the midline. So the hip adducts, or for teachers, sometimes it's easier to think of it like the pelvis shifts off center. The pelvis is no longer centered. It shifts away from the leg that's lifting. This is the most egregious error that we can make when we try to stabilize through the hip and have a good steady foundation. It's going to come up in so many other yoga poses. You've heard me talk about this in probably every single pose we've done. How do we reduce excessive hip adduction and instead strengthen our hip abductors? Finally, this pose offers a wonderful opportunity to coordinate the movement of these opposite limbs so that the arm and the leg leave the floor at the same moment, reach the apex at the same moment, return at the same moment, and touch down simultaneously. So we're looking for that coordination of movement. biggest disagreement or controversy about pointer dog? Probably just the name. There's nothing, there's no big hot discussions about this. In fact, I think this pose is often sort of dismissed as a pass-through pose. It's just a super easy, neutral warm-up, whatever. And it's often cued as back bend, lift the arm and the leg nice and high, and then hug opposite limbs towards each other. So you get students alternating between a back bend and then a lot of rounding, thinking, well, maybe we're working the core this way. Maybe we're doing something good here. But I would say finding neutral spine is way, way harder and less painful than just swinging back and forth between arching and rounding the spine. When you do that, you're back bending where you can back bend the easiest. Often that's the low back, the neck, and or you're rounding where it's easiest. For some of you, that actually is the low back or the upper back. So, and sometimes that head's just left hanging as though it's detached from the rest of the spine itself. Okay, so let's break down the stance in terms of what it looks like. You're on all fours. Your knees should be as wide as your hips or as wide as the widest part of your pelvis. Again, we have that inner hip distance, outer hip distance, just have it be somewhere in there. So if you look back between your arms towards your thighs should be perpendicular to the floor, straight up and down. If you're looking from the side view as a teacher, or if you're practicing yourself and you have a mirror, everybody should have a mirror. Your thighs are perpendicular to the floor. The top of your thigh is not in front of your knees. It's not behind your knees. It's directly over the knees. The hands, however, I would have slightly in front of the shoulders, so that's not a straight up and down vertical line. And again, if we have that carrying angle in people's arms, we've talked about this in other episodes, when you view the arm from the side, it will look slightly bent. That's okay. You don't need to fix that. It can look hyperextended often, but it's just that carrying angle. We're going to see changes in the stance when you ask people to lift one arm and or one leg. Often people will narrow knees and then lift a leg, again, adducting the hip preemptively as a poor but habitual strategy to finding stability. And then in the hands and the arms, what we often see is people bending the arms to lift the leg. Hard to keep those arms straight for some people. The feet are usually pointed straight back, but for additional stability, you can tuck the toes under. And when you extend the leg back, I don't care if your foot's pointed or flexed. You can do whatever you like. It's certainly fine to flex the ankle and see what changes in the pose for you. The knees are flexed, which means they're bent. If kneeling is uncomfortable for you, certainly use a blanket. And if you can't do this pose on your knees, try it on your back. Moving up to the pelvis is level, especially when we extend the opposite limbs away. Now, level means the bones of the pelvis are level. The larger someone's buttocks are, the more developed their gluteals are, the more the pelvis will appear unlevel because the raised leg is using that glute max in such a way that it will plump up, making the pelvis appear unlevel. So don't get too strict that the muscular part has to be level, just the bones, which means you're kind of eyeballing it, okay? Lumbar spine is neutral, thoracic spine is neutral, cervical spine is neutral. What does that mean? It means the natural curves have been preserved and that they're not excessive. So we haven't increased the arching in the low back beyond neutral, and we haven't increased the rounding in the upper back more than neutral. And we haven't arched the neck more than neutral, nor are we letting it hang. Well, that's all fine and good. Oh, neutral spine sounds great. But people have no idea what that is. It's very difficult to just sense, to magically intuit. We teach neutral spine by using the floor. The floor gives us a lot more sensation across the back of the body to tell if we're increasing our arch or decreasing it, which is another reason why to start this pose on your back in dead bug. Or you can use an external prop. You can use a pole or a block to help you discern when the back of the skull lines up with the midpoint between the shoulder blades, which lines up with the middle of the back of the pelvis. When those are all in one line, you're neutral. or you're pretty darn close to neutral. In that shoulder girdle, we're looking for the scapula to upwardly rotate, so it wraps around the sides of the rib cage and moves up towards the head slightly. The arm bone will be externally rotated, and the shoulder joint itself is flexing. Those are our biomechanical terms. You'll see these all outlined on our cheat sheets, which will now be available only to subscribers. Subscribing is free, and it's done on our website, theyogaposers.com. Subscribe to the website there, which is different than subscribing on YouTube. Please do that too. But when you subscribe there, you're going to get access to free cheat sheets, breaking down the pose, reminders, cues, all the wonderful things that we talk about in a cheat sheet form. And then there'll be tutorials, video tutorials of how to do the poses, only available for free to subscribers of our website, theyogaposers.com. Okay, so if our first goal is to find neutral spine, how do we do that? You start on your back. You lie down, knees bent, feet on the floor. Everybody disagrees about, should there be an arch? Oh my God, you have to have an arch no matter what. Oh my goodness, totally flat in the back. No, never flat in the back. It's the most evil thing in the world. You're never going to get teachers to agree. And everybody's sort of right and everybody's sort of wrong. And everybody's right in that we want some sort of an arch, not too much, not too little. And we do want you to be able to flatten your back, but not permanently and not crush it into the floor. Where we go wrong is thinking that what's correct for us is the way that everyone else should do it. We get wrong when we think everybody needs to do it the same way. And how we can think of this better is by thinking of movement patterns. Some people arch their low back too much in order to do lots of things, almost anything, bending over, straightening up, reaching, lifting a knee. The back is arching, rotating and arching, side bending and arching. It's doing all sorts of things. That's a lower back that's lacking stability. And what we'd like to do is increase abdominal tone. When we increase abdominal tone, we start to control that rotation, and we can reduce how much arching is happening. Even the best physical therapists in the world still advocate to flatten the low back. So the floor limits how much you're actually rounding the spine. If you have very large buttocks, flattening the back is not going to happen, or it's extremely difficult for it to happen. For those people, we can put some padding, a folded towel, a rolled up hand towel. It's not a lot. Put something under the back so you can flatten into something, because we want that feedback. We want to be able to press our back into something and feel like, yes, I've actually reduced that curve. What's happened with this latest trend of never flatten your back, oh my goodness, is people who have this lumbar extension tendency, who tend to arch the back too much. They've gotten like a free pass. Well, now I've got a hall pass. I can go anywhere I want, any time of day. No, sometimes you have to stay in your lane. Sometimes you have to go to class. So we're trying to train a reduction in that tendency to excessively arch. And that's where all these old-fashioned cues of flatten your back came from. It got problematic because some people just tucked their pelvis to flatten their back. They gripped with their gluteals, they overgripped the pelvic floor, they introduced a lot of difficulties in the pelvic floor from this, a lot of unnecessary tension, and they were sort of cheating. They were just tucking strongly to flatten the back. And that's different. It's not good control. So often what's advocated now is a more neutral pelvis. We can use bones to help us find neutral. Neutral is when the pubic bone and the hip points, those prominent bones at the front of the pelvis, line up. So if you're lying on your back, regardless of how much belly tissue is there, if you have a lot of fat deposited in between those 3 points, ignore that. Just those 3 bones themselves, pubic bone, 2 hip points, those should be level. When they're level, if your back still has a strong arch, can you reduce it without lifting that pubic bone really high? Then we have our lumbar flexion types. Those are the types of people who tuck their pelvis and round their low back. Every time they try to lift a knee or reach with an arm or do any sort of movement, they're getting lots of tucking, rounding. So those people got really hurt with the flatten your back to the floor cueing that was predominant for several decades. And they would just have an achy, sore back. So they would do it more. And then their back just got worse and worse and worse. It didn't get better from doing core work. For those people, definitely use some padding, a folded towel, a rolled up hand towel between the low back and the floor. And instead of crushing or pushing down into that space, let that pad limit how much your low back presses into the floor, or it's a spacer to prevent your back from flattening. So I don't know if you're still like, well, wait, am I supposed to flatten my back or not? Remember, the cue is not the final shape. You're supposed to get to neutral spine, neutral for you, which is some degree of arch. It doesn't have to be perfectly neutral during the exercise, although some people strive for that, and good for you. But for ordinary people, when you stand up, we're looking to see, is the spine more neutral after having done this core work? Okay, so maybe you're flattening it beyond neutral so that when you stand up, there's an improvement there. The pelvis is not tilted so far forward. The low back isn't arching as much. Most cues are trying to get you towards neutral, but saying have a neutral spine is not a great cue. Telling someone to get into neutral spine doesn't tell them how to do it. So cues tell us how to do something, but they're not necessarily the final shape. If you're driving down a road and your alignment and your wheels are off, so your car constantly pulls to the left, you might tell that driver, keep turning your wheels slightly to the right, but it's just to get that person centered. But they might not know that and then keep turning the steering wheel too far to the right. And I will say, oh, no, now go back to the left. So this is kind of how these cues come about. Students do them, they find neutral, but then they keep doing the cue and they go too far, and then they have to do the opposite cue, so they start to get confused. We're just trying to get everybody to go straight down the middle of the road. You may be veering left or right. We are going to learn how to do this pose really well when we turn it upside down. So here we go with dead bug pose. I wish Jane was here because this is one of her most favorite poses for core work. And even though it's an incredibly good way to prepare for this pose, I would say be careful if your hip flexors are really strong from overusing this as a prep. Okay, you're on your back now, you're doing dead bug. You've taken table pose and you've flipped it on its back. Your back is quote unquote neutral, it's quote unquote flat. You're reducing that curve or preserving it. Arms are straight up towards the ceiling and the knees are lifted up over the hips. Just getting here should involve some core work. And if it doesn't, your low back is probably too flat, your knees are too close or too far away, or your back is arching. So it's already hard just to do table pose like this, hard to do correctly. You might be like, it's easy for me. See if you're doing it correctly. Is your pelvis neutral, pubic bone, hip points level? Do you have that natural arch in your back without tension or pain in the low back? Do you feel your core muscles engage? You should be able to poke around your abdominals and they should be toned. And if they're not, you're not doing the pose. It's not just happening. So instead, start with your feet on the floor and then try tipping one knee out to the side at a time. See if you can keep your pelvis from rotating. Your pelvis should stay level instead of following the leg. Step 2, lift one foot off the floor at a time, set it back down, alternate legs. These marching steps get you closer to the work of pointer dog. And I would encourage you to pay particular attention to the moment that you're about to lift the foot off the floor and actually starting to lift it. That's when the back will arch. And for some of you, the closer the knee gets to the chest, your back will start to flatten too soon. Theoretically, the lumbar curve should stay neutral, meaning it has some degree of arch from lifting the foot off the floor to bringing the knee directly over the hip joint. That's when the thigh is perpendicular to the floor. For those of you that flatten too much, you're working on keeping that arch the whole time. For those of you who arch too much, you're pressing your back into the floor or into a pad the whole time. So you're not saying, well, at a certain point, I'm allowed to let my back arch. What we want is unchanging lumbar spine from when the leg is relaxed, the foot is on the floor, to now the knee is over the hip. Unchanging lumbar spine. That should take due diligence and attention. It will not automatically happen unless you've been training it for a while. Once that's okay, you can do something that's a little harder. Both knees now lifted directly over the hips and tap one foot to the floor at a time. Some people find this easier. Their core automatically engages more, just trying to help hold the legs up. The hardest step beyond all of these is to lift and or lower both legs at the same time. This is an advanced move. And if you think that obviously anyone can lift and lower their legs at the same time, but can you do it and keep your lumbar spine utterly, completely undisturbed, unchanged? Lots of abdominal tone should be happening here, but it should feel very, very quiet in the low back. It should feel very easy in the low back when you do it right, and quite a bit of tone and work through the abdominals. When you want to work on the shoulders here, I would say just do this with the legs down on the floor at first. Arms reach straight overhead, fingertips to the ceiling, palms face in, and simply reach the arms towards the ceiling and then draw the head of the arm bone back into the socket along the floor. See if you can do that simple movement without the upper back arching and flattening, arching and flattening. So now we're trying to test, can the thoracic spine stay stable as you reach the arms a little bit, not too much, and then draw them back a little bit, not too much. It's always Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, neutral. For some of you, this is where your tendency to arch, right where the rib cage meets the low back, right at T12, L1, those vertebrae, if you tend to arch there, as you lift the arms, as you bring them overhead, you're going to arch there more strongly. And sometimes putting a pad underneath the lowest part of the ribs or a strap folded 1 to 3 times. Press the bottom of the rib cage down into that strap as you move your arms is great. You could do that as you move your legs. You could say, I'm not going to let the top of my pelvis touch the floor, but I am going to keep the bottom of my rib cage down and then try to move your limbs. For some of you, that's your core work, not arching high. Right? Some of you arch in the lumbar really low, close to the top of the pelvis. Some of you arch too much at the top. Some of you arch at both too much. So you have to figure out, where am I arching and how do I stabilize that in the pose using the floor for good feedback? Going further with the shoulder, set the shoulder in the socket, don't jam it back, and then let the arm reach alongside the ear. Gravity's taking it down. If it starts to pinch, you pause, draw the head of the arm bone softly back into the socket, tone through your core, and then see if your range can increase. If the arm doesn't easily get there, widen the arms and see if that gives you a better way to bring the arms alongside the ears. Many, 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 many people pop their ribs in order to get their arms closer to the floor. So if you can easily bring your arm to the floor, your thumb touches the floor, and you're like, this is no big deal, Sarah. It's super easy for me. Take one hand and see if you can pass it underneath between the floor and the bottom of the rib cage. If that's popped up, you might find that your actual range of motion is much less if you keep the spine neutral. Another way to still get to our first goal for this pose of neutral spine is to use external feedback. So we've done it here on our back using the floor. We can up the ante by lying on a bolster with a block behind the head or a block underneath the pelvis. So the only reason we're using a block is because most bolsters might not be long enough for your pelvis all the way to your head. So figure that out. What do you need to do to have your support long enough? And that's great, because the softer the surface, the more your body will sort of sink in, make some impressions. The heaviest parts descend, the least heavy parts ascend, and then you're very challenged with this softer surface. You have a lot more feedback to try to keep stable, still, and neutral. And you will find this is a much more difficult way to do dead bug pose. Contraindications for dead bug pose are people who have very strong hip flexors already with a very strong arch in the back. Maybe you want to do some hip flexor releasing. You want to do some strengthening, stabilizing, and other poses before you go to this very hip flexor dominant pose of raise your legs and hold them raised and then lower them towards the floor part way and then bring them back up to a bent position. That's very strong hip flexor work. And using your hip flexors is fine. It's just now you're making those muscles even more strong, even more dominant, even if you're getting some decent abdominal work at the same time. When one part's really strong, even though you're strengthening the other, the abdominals never really catch up. So if you're in dead bug on the bolster, floating that leg against gravity, that heavy leg, the straighter that leg gets and reaches out and hovers over the floor, the more strongly the hip flexors have to contract to hold the leg up. So that's your quad, that's your pectineus, your psoas, your iliacus. The thing is that those muscles also are connected to the pelvis and pull the pelvis into that anterior tilt. Some of them are connected to the spine and they arch the spine more. This is a huge ask on the abdominals to resist all those other muscles doing their job. So if you think this is easy, I would double check and feel that you are keeping the lumbar spine stable and that the hip point isn't moving, the ilium, that hip bone isn't following the leg as you straighten the leg. Check out the tutorial. If you subscribe to the website, you'll see. Okay, let's get into the full pose where we're off of the back and we come onto the floor. And this version is going to seem so easy now after doing dead bug. How do we know that the spine is neutral here, though? Grab a pole. The Iyengers started the use of this 4-foot-long pole, 1 inch to 1.5 inches in diameter, less than $5 at the hardware store. Fantastic investment. If you don't have that sort of thing at home, you can use a Swiffer stick, like a light cleaning utensils. You can use a curtain rod. Make use of your home. Your whole home is your yoga playground. There are so many things that you can use for feedback. You place that pole vertically along the back of the spine from the head to between the shoulder blades to the middle of the pelvis. We are trying to preserve those 3 points of contact as we do pointer dog. This is when we get into what's called external cueing versus internal cueing. External cueing says, don't let that pole roll off your back and hit the floor as you're doing pointer dog. External cueing is maintain contact of the pole to the back of your skull, exactly between the shoulder blades, no higher, no lower, and the middle of your pelvis as you do pointer dog. Internal cueing is maintain neutral spine, use your core, even zip up from pubic bone to navel, draw the pelvic floor in and up. Like, come on, these are esoteric, magical, ephemeral cues. And yoga teachers out there, movement teachers, you and I know these feelings. They're real and strong. They're like good friends to us. And you'd be like, no, I feel that and I know it and it's real. Agreed. It's real and it's tangible, but you might be someone who's been working on it for years. Ordinary people can benefit strongly, even you who feel like you've got this internal cue nailed. I can draw my navel to my spine. I can pull the perineum and lift it. I can keep my pelvis level during pointer dog. We'll throw that pole up there and test it because we can trust these things internally, but we always trust and verify. Verification, keep that pole there. You will find a new level of focus and abdominal engagement as your competitive streak comes in and you say, I'm not going to let that pole clatter to the floor. If you want to take it even further, the pull horizontal across the pelvis, that will help you know if you're rotating. You can even put some plastic bracelets around the ends of the horizontally draped pull across the pelvis or the shoulder girdle, and those bracelets will clatter to the floor if you teeter-totter a little bit as you lift legs or change sides. And many of you are going to find like, oh, I'm pretty good. I can keep that pull from rolling, or I can keep those bracelets on the horizontal pull just fine when the leg is moving and raised. It's when you go to switch sides, it's the transition that's the most disruptive to the core. And transitions are the most commonly injurious place in yoga. Transitions are when we get hurt. Transitions are messy. So clean up your transitions if you think you're good at this pose. Okay, so we've gone through how to get neutral spine, how to use external cues or props to make sure that we're in neutral spine. We've covered lumbar flexion and lumbar extension movement types. All right, so our takeaways are: 1, can you find neutral spine? Now you know why it's so important. 2, use external props and cues to make sure that you're doing the pose with a neutral spine. And 3, figure out if you're a lumbar flexion, you round that spine too fast and you don't flex the hip fast enough kind of core person, or do you just arch that low back so quickly and you flex the hip way too quickly core type. You need opposite cues. And so you need to start discerning for yourself when to ignore the teacher and when to trust what you've learned instead. The number one question that I'd like you to explore in your practice is use that pull and figure out what parts of your body are consistently too far ahead of that pull and they can't get back, and which parts of your body easily touch that pull. Those 3 points are going to need to move forward or back in many, many other yoga poses. Take that pull with you into those other poses and then start thinking about that in terms of your posture. All right, thanks for joining me for these episodes of Pointer Dog. Go to our website to get the cheat sheet. You have to subscribe at theyogaposers.com, and you'll get your free tutorials only available to subscribees. And then like, subscribe, follow, and share these episodes. Doing those things helps the algorithm figure itself out for other people wanting to strengthen their practice, defeat movement and postural patterns that are working for them, and fall in love with yoga again. It's a wonderful practice when you do the cues that are right for you. All right, I'm Sarah Westbrook. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.